Am I? What up, Z-Pack? Man, your intros are getting insaner and insaner and more insaner, Logan. I love it. Empathy. I'm feeling empathy for Logan and his amazing intros. So guys, today we're going to talk about, it's a follow-up to something that I'm quite crazy about, and that is this distinction between types of empathy and compassion and its relevance to us in the caregiving space, physicians, nurses, anybody in healthcare, and actually any human being, because we are constantly taught in healthcare that empathy is good. And I'm going to argue today, and I've argued before, and there's another episode we're going to link to after this that we talked about how empathy can actually hurt you. I will argue that empathy is going to kill you, it's going to burn you out if you use the wrong type of empathy. And this is particularly salient for doctors and nurses because they are burning out in droves, and the question is why. They talk about compassion fatigue and all these other things. I would argue what we're talking about is empathy fatigue. And the article we're talking about today, I did the Cliff Notes version from Science Daily, and it basically says, we can't see it, 2 types of empathy elicit different health effects. And it's based on a Penn study, UPenn, that was, let's see, it's a Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. Don't walk in her shoes. Different forms of perspective taking affect stress physiology. Now, this is what it's about. When we talk about empathy, I'm going to frame the issue 3 ways. Then we're going to talk about the results of this trial and how they affect us as caregivers. Empathy is technically feeling what another person feels and understanding that, all right? But there's subtypes of it, and we want to distinguish those subtypes and also weave in compassion, which is love and concern in the face of suffering. All right, so the 3 types of empathy, just to kind of frame it. The first one is cognitive empathy. What this means is being intellectually able to understand intellectually what another person's situation is. In other words, what they're going through, what emotions they might be feeling, and how they might see a situation. So being able to take their perspective. Now, this can be very detached. And the thing about cognitive empathy is, if you're a physician, say, or a nurse, it means, oh, I kind of understand that this patient's been through a lot. They have a cancer diagnosis. They're scared. They're probably overwhelmed. So I'm going to respond with the following. All right? Now, the thing about cognitive empathy is it in itself is a very high-level function. It allows you to really effectively be a caregiver because you understand where your patient is coming from. However, there's a dark side, and that is that many sociopaths, many psychopaths, most politicians, most business people have high levels of cognitive empathy, which means they can figure out what you're thinking and feeling in your situation and use that information to manipulate you. So in other words, cognitive empathy doesn't necessarily mean that you care about the person whose feelings you understand. It means that you can use those feelings for whatever purpose you want. It could be for a caring, compassionate purpose, or it could be for a manipulative purpose.
This is why car commercials used to talk about miles per gallon, and now it's like, Toyota, made with love.
That's manipulative empathy. So Jeffrey Dahmer had cognitive empathy, Hitler had cognitive empathy, but a doctor, a really good doctor, a really good nurse can have great levels of cognitive empathy. Now the next type of empathy is emotional empathy, and I'm simplifying stuff, okay? Emotional empathy means feeling someone else's pain and emotions as if they were your own, putting yourself exactly in their shoes and feeling it like that, and then acting from that feeling. Now, this type of empathy can be actually, I would argue, is the most dangerous and worst type of empathy, but it's the most common type that we see in healthcare, because when we talk about empathy, when we're training people, when we're screening for people, this is the kind of empathy everyone assumes is empathy. And what it means is that you're taking on other people's problems as though they were your own. Can you imagine the kind of potential burnout, the kind of mistakes you would make? And I've talked about this before because this type of empathy it's a spotlight. You can only really shine it on 1 or 2 or a very small group of people, and you feel that pain as if it were your own, and it takes a toll on you, and then you act in a way that may not be objectively correct. It may not be the most compassionate response. It may be a response to the pain that you feel. Now, imagine in a drug addict, that response might be to give them the drug so that they don't feel pain. Now, the third type of empathy is what one researcher calls compassionate empathy. And what this means is you feel someone's pain, you know what that is, you have cognitive empathy around it, so you know what their situation is, but you respond with concern and caring and love and a desire, a burning desire to actually do something about it that is actually going to help the overall suffering. So this is a slightly more detached, a slightly more Buddhist kind of philosophy, which says, I feel what you're going through, but I don't take your pain as my own pain, but I have some cognitive understanding of what you're feeling, and I want to help. I want this suffering to be alleviated in a way that's actually sustainable and long-term. And you can look at big picture, and you can look at things that emotional empathy just shines a spotlight on, but compassionate empathy can look at the bigger picture. So these three types of empathy now, how do they relate to what we do as doctors and nurses and caregivers on the front lines, and as human beings in general? That's where this paper gets really interesting, because they decided to look actually at the physiologic responses in participants. And I think these were college-age young people that they studied. They looked at 200 people, and they wanted to see what's the physiologic response to the different types of empathy. And this is how they looked at it. They said, okay, students, this is what we're going to do. We have these stories that we've written up that are purportedly, we're going to tell you they're from a study partner. And there are these really painful stories like, oh, the study partner got in an accident, lost their job, their mother died, something that would elicit some kind of empathic emotional response. But before they showed them the story, what they said was, okay, they would tell them three sets of instructions. They would say, either I want you to feel what it is like to be that person. In other words, take their feelings as your own. The second set of results is I want you to just kind of objectively understand what that person is feeling, but don't necessarily take it as your own. And then the third set of instructions was just be detached and objective, and don't think about feelings and things like that. And this is what they found looking at the Cliff's Notes of this article. And I encourage people to look at the original article. What they discovered was that the very act of helping people actually elicited physiologic responses. And there were basically two major types. There was the stress, fight, or flight response, which is marked by cortisol release, elevations in blood pressure and heart rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Historically, it's been studied that these type of responses, when they're prolonged, can be damaging to health. Heart disease, stroke, stress, et cetera. Long-term, damaging. And what they found is that cortisol physiologic threat response was elevated in people who had the emotional empathic response, feeling other people's pain as if it were their own. It was almost as if they were in the same damaging threat relationship that the stories person described. So in other words, this person's mom died, they were in an accident, they're in a lot of trouble. When the person feels that as their own, they respond physiologically as if they were in that same dangerous or stressful predicament. And the theory being, and they didn't obviously look at this as an endpoint, that long-term this could be damaging. Now the other group that said feel and understand their pain, but in a way that you're a little more detached, so that you see it as more of a cognitive empathy with compassion, like you're worried about them, but you're not taking on the pain yourself. And those guys had a arousal response that was associated with positive types of stress. In other words, like a response to a challenge that's accepted, that you got it, but it's going to be like, okay, I got to step up and do this, right? Or you take a test, you've studied, you know the answers, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. That'll get you aroused physiologically, but not stressed out as a fight or flight, like, oh my God, I'm going to die here, like I'm in danger. And the two different types of empathy then had different physiologic responses. And the theory being, one is going to kill you eventually, burn you out, stress you out, take a toll on your body. The other is going to inspire and activate you physiologically to actually respond in a way that's actually helpful. Now, which would we rather have in healthcare? The emotional empathic response, which will slowly destroy us, not just emotionally, psychologically in terms of burnout, but physically, or the more compassionate empathic response, which is I feel and understand what my patient is going through and their experience, and I'm motivated to help them through compassion and love. But I'm not going to take their pain as my own, because then I go home and I'm broken, right? So that is how I'm interpreting this, and it supports the discussions we've had on empathy versus what I call compassion, which is really compassionate empathy. You understand their pain, but you respond with love and concern, and you try to help them, but you don't take that suffering as your own. So in the setting of this, what I want to do now is take your comments, because see, to me, if you're gonna think about empathy, and we're going to train in the next generation of caregivers, we're going to try to reduce burnout, we're going to try to make our jobs sustainable, we're going to try to be better nurses and doctors and pharmacists and respiratory therapists. How are we going to do that? We have to understand the nature of empathy versus compassionate empathy, or just compassion. And we need to promote the right type if we're going to do this right. So now we're going to go I want you to hit share on this. We're going to link to our original compassion talk, which I think is very important. And I want you to spread this far and wide. And now we're going to go to an uncensored, explicit discussion with your comments called Tribe Talk, where we're going to get your feedback and talk this out. What do you think, Tom?
Hell yeah, we're going to say hella swears, like butt, boogers, all kinds of stuff. It's going to be fun.
Snitches. It's what we do, people. All right, we out.
Go, 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 go. I'm alright. Uh-huh.